On today's Plate of History Beans, I'll talk a bit about how much people earned for their work in the 19th century. Normally, when I'm researching my short segments, I try to look at 4 or 5 sources and pull the details I find interesting. I don't claim to be a historian. I simply enjoy looking into these sorts of things. As I've mentioned in the past, if there is some detail about the Old West you would like me to look into, I would likely give it a shot, though I can't offer any assurances the information would be as accurate as someone who earns a living looking at these things. At any rate, I do try to report my findings honestly and normally look at more than one source. This week, however, I've gleaned most of my information from a single source called Rates of Wages and Costs of Subsistence in the year 1874. As you might suspect, it's a government document, not what one might call scintillating reading. However, I found the book and the charts and tables compiled by the author to be both useful and enlightening as to what life may have been like 150 years ago in the Old West. If you're interested in looking at the document, I'll have a link below. So let's talk about statistics. To start, I should point out that in the 19th century, ours was largely an agricultural society. Wages could vary widely from state to state, just as they do now. For example, if you were an experienced hand working on a farm in New Jersey or New Hampshire in 1874, you could expect a wage of around $1.70 a day with meals and a bed. However, if you worked on a similar farm in Iowa, you would be paid half that amount, around 80 cents a day. In Texas, the setting for hunting charm, the daily wage wasn't much better than Iowa, at around $1 a day. Wages almost everywhere varied according to the season as well. Workers would be paid more in the summer than the winter. Farm work isn't as taxing in the winter. The experienced hand working in New Hampshire, earning $1.70 in the summer, made only $1 a day in the winter. In Texas, the wage would drop from $1 a day to 75 cents a day. For common or inexperienced workers, wages also dropped. An inexperienced man in New Hampshire got around $1.25 a day, and in Texas, if you were inexperienced, you would earn only 50 cents a day along with your board. As it is today, having job skills could increase your wages. Blacksmiths in the 19th century were extremely important. A skilled metalsmith could expect to earn around $3 a day, regardless of where he lived. Bricklayers and masons, some of the highest paid workers at the time, could earn around $4 a day, and in many areas $5 or more, depending upon skill level. Cabinet makers, coopers, or barrel makers, and carpenters all earned around $3 a day. It should be noted that carpenters, cabinet makers, and coopers were similar jobs, and a man doing one of those jobs might do all 3. I'll also note that in general, wages for woodworkers in the territories, Arizona Territory, New Mexico, Colorado, Dakota, and Montana, were a little higher. Painters, plasterers, cobblers or shoemakers, stonecutters, tailors, tanners, tinsmiths, and wheelwrights all averaged somewhere between $2.50 and $3 a day, with exceptions. Once again, wages in the territories were generally higher. I would also add that the information compiled by the author of this statistical guide must have been working with limited data at times. For example, the author lists the daily wage of a plasterer in Idaho in 1874 at $11 a day. This is a tremendous anomaly in comparison to the wages paid for plastering anywhere in the U.S. at the time, which leads me to believe the author may have had a small sample size to draw from, perhaps only a single worker with an overactive sense of himself. As I've already noted, our nation during the 19th century was primarily based on agriculture. One of the most profitable crops grown, especially in the South, was cotton. The city of Dallas is said to have been built on cotton, along with tanning buffalo hides. One of the first stadiums built in Texas is named the Cotton Bowl. So let's look for a moment at wages paid to cotton workers. Following emancipation, plantation owners, spoiled by centuries of extremely cheap slave labor, were forced to pay workers for the first time. I will say, however, that working on a cotton plantation remained dreadful work and in many cases didn't pay much. Up until now, I've listed wages by the day because of the nature of the document. These are weekly wages. A man picking cotton in the southern states in the 1870s would earn around $7 to $10 a week for his labor. If you held one of the lowlier jobs, such as picker boy or frame spinner, jobs often done by children as young as 6, you would earn around $3 a week or less. Even overseers, repair shop / engine room foremen, or other bosses earned only around $20 to $25 a week. Pay also varied by state. In North Carolina, where state lawmakers created especially draconian labor laws that favored landowners, wages could be less than half those numbers. In terms of wages for mill workers in the North, men and women who turned raw cotton or wool into fabric or finished garments, their weekly wages were usually around $12 to $15 a week. Steelworkers and machinists earned more, often as much as $25 a week. So a man working in a factory in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, or Maryland could do well for himself and his family. It should be noted that weekly wages usually meant a 12-hour day, 6 days a week, often in dangerous conditions. I'll try to draw a few conclusions with the caveat that I won't be subjected to a good deal of criticism based on variations in numbers. Generally speaking, it seems like a yearly wage for someone in the 19th century would have been somewhere around $800 to $1,000. Skilled steel workers and tradesmen could earn more. Farm workers might earn considerably less. Factory owners, magnates, and tycoons often raked in vast wealth during this period. Thus, the rise of the term robber baron and the appearance of novels like Mark Twain's The Gilded Age and Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. That's it for today's Plate of History Beans. I will revisit this topic next week with information regarding the costs of food, materials, real estate, etc. during the last half of the 19th century. As always, if you like my content, I hope you'll hit the like and subscribe buttons. I'll have a link to the document I looked at as well as the website that lists several statistical documents related to life during the 19th century. Also, if you like my work, check out my authors page on Amazon. Any support is truly appreciated. Now it's time for Chapter 32 of Hunting Charm, A Subtle Change of Heart. Chapter 32, A Subtle Change of Heart. The next day, following her conversation with Henry regarding supplies, Doreen entered the mercantile for the second time. She already knew the owner, Helmer Schmidt, during her first meeting with the rotund shopkeeper who, dressed in lederhosen and wore comically thick spectacles, Doreen felt the shopkeeper might be immune to her charms. That proved to be wrong. "You look beautiful in thy dress," Helmer said, recognizing Doreen immediately. She had already described her plans to Helmer. Her decision to be upfront about her plans was based upon another bit of advice her father had given her years before. "Don't mince words. Tell people what you're going for. Those that want
help you or our friends. As for the rest, be friendly, but don't waste time. We's going to have the railroad coming through soon, Helmer said. You will be very successful if you shop mit Elma. Are you married, Mr. Schmidt? Doreen already knew that Helmer had a wife. She had seen the plump German woman the previous day when she purchased the dresses. Yes, he said. Helmer has a wife and 3 children. Schmidt fanned himself as if his family weighed upon him. I hope that won't prevent you from visiting my place when we open, Doreen said. We shall see. Helmer chuckled, then glanced around the corner for his wife. Seeing she wasn't there, he continued in a whisper. Mr. Endicott at the bank says you plan to be discreet, yeah? Very discreet. Well, we shall see, Helmer said. Doreen gave the shopkeeper the list of supplies. Helmer spent several minutes examining the page, then said, For a lovely young woman and a new business owner, I think 60 or perhaps $55. Doreen placed her hand on the seat of Helmer's lederhosen and gave him a playful pinch, an action that caused the round man to jiggle. I have limited resources, she said, but the sooner I can open, the sooner you can enjoy my company. Helmer looked a second time at the list. Yeah, a good point, he said. Unfortunately, at that moment, Helga Schmidt, Helmer's wife, appeared. Helmer cleared his throat, looked first at Doreen and then at his wife, and said, Maybe $40 for the lumber and another. He paused again, apparently adding numbers in his head. $12 for the wood, the lamp oil, and the rope, and pitch, and nails, and such. I think $52. Would you take an even 50? Well, Helmer looked nervously at Helga. I think 50 would be fine. We like to help folks that are new in town. Helmer? Helga Schmidt snapped. Come here! Her R's rolled ominously. Helga cajoled her husband from the room, and a loud discussion in German ensued. Doreen couldn't understand the language, but Helmer's pleading tone was telling. Finally, Helga ended things with a loud, Alter Dick, Helmer entered a moment later, blushing and grinning. I'm sorry, but we must have $52 for the merchandise. Doreen paused, looked at the glaring Helga, and nodded. Could you possibly deliver? I don't yet have access to a wagon. It would be such a help. Helmer glanced at his wife, and Helga gave a slight nod. Sehr gut. Helmer chuckled, clapping his hands and smiling again. We can do that. 3 hours later, the lumber arrived in a wagon driven by a Mexican gentleman and a pre-teen replica of Helmer. What is wrong with his arm? The boy asked, looking curiously at Henry. He was badly beaten for being nosy. Maureen gave the chubby boy a stern look, then winked to let him know she was kidding. Helmer Jr.'s cheeks turned red, just as his father's had earlier. Doreen wondered if little Helmer would tell his parents about the strange-looking black man living at the pretty white lady's house, she decided it didn't matter. Her potential clients needed to know of Henry's presence. A little talk about a scary man at Miss Tarwater's place would only help in terms of business. The clients she hoped to attract would be interested in a secure environment. Henry started work immediately. The first day, despite the June heat, he remained busy until dark. Before leaving for the evening, Doreen served beans from a can. "I'm not much of a cook," she said. "This here's just fine," Henry said. I I never had to cook for myself. It's maybe I She trailed off, recalling how she had always taken her servants for granted. The next morning, Henry started early. "Is it necessary to begin in the middle of the night?" Doreen complained. "Morning is the best part of the day for working. I spoke to the Mexican fellow who come with the lumber yesterday. He says he'll work afternoons for 25 cents a day." "Are you planning to pay him yourself?" "No, ma'am. We discussed a second man, and y'all said it was fine." "I don't plan on paying any man 25 cents for half days doing work a monkey could do." Henry stopped abruptly. Then, to her surprise, he shrugged and said, "Reckon I'll be on my way then. Go find yourself another monkey." He turned and began gathering his tools. For a moment, Doreen felt confused. "What are you doing?" "Henry ain't no monkey. Go on and find someone else." "Henry, I wasn't talking about you." Henry paused, then turned. "Miss Doreen, it don't matter one bit who you was talking about. This here ain't monkey work. All due respect, Miss Tarwater, I ain't no monkey, and neither is Manuel. He's a good, hard-working man with children at home. Now, I'll be going." Henry turned once more, but Doreen spoke before he could go. "Henry, now just stop. This is foolish. I didn't mean to make it sound like it. It's the morning, and oh, you tell Manuel that we will give him a try. 25 cents seems reasonable." Henry stopped, but didn't turn. "I ain't no monkey, ma'am. What about that there?" Doreen paused, rubbing her forehead. For a moment she felt her anger rise. Was she going to allow Henry to speak to her in such a way? "Henry, I said you could have your man. It's my money." "Yes, ma'am, but is it really right for you to speak to me in such a way?" "What are you talking about? You're my hired man. I'll speak to you in any way I please." "Well, then go on and hire another man, then. Henry gonna go on back to Oklahoma." "But, Henry—" Doreen felt her emotions rise, a mixture of anger and something else. She realized she not only needed Henry, but she also felt an attachment to the man. "Henry, now, you're being unreasonable. You need to be more respectful." "I ain't been nothing but respectful to you, ma'am. I reckon it's time for me to go." "No, no, you can't go." The words came out sounding more desperate than she had hoped. Henry paused. "Ma'am," he said, "you can't hold me here. They done freed folks like me. Abraham Lincoln says we are free, and that means I ain't got to stand here and be called a monkey." I didn't call you a monkey, Henry. You just as well might have. Ain't no difference talking about me or another man in such a way. If you can't see that, then I reckon I'll be on my way. Henry, now Doreen's anger dissipated, replaced by a fear that Henry might abandon her. Her father had never said anything about such a situation. She'd always assumed that paying someone meant you could treat them however you pleased. There had been nothing about growing attached to someone. Yes, ma'am. Henry waited patiently. Doreen took a deep breath and said, Again, I'm not much good in the morning, Henry. I'm sorry for speaking to you like that. You're right. Claiming your work is monkey's work. And speaking of others in such a way, that was a terrible thing. You're right. I will ride into town and fetch your man as soon as I have time to get properly dressed. Henry turned slowly, nodding his head slightly, and began walking back toward the house. Yes'm, he said. So, so you're staying? Yes, ma'am. Thank you for apologizing. With that, Henry resumed his work. Flustered, Doreen watched him for a long moment. She wanted to add a tart reply, something to save face, but realized that if she said what she was thinking, Henry would pack his things and go. Once again, something happened inside Doreen that would have been impossible only a month before. Instead of having a tantrum, she swallowed her pride and went inside. Once there, she stomped around for a few minutes, mouthed a few choice remarks to her reflection in the mirror, then got dressed and walked stoically by Henry, mounted Cotton Socks, and rode into town. At the Mercantile, she spoke with Manuel and told him she would pay 25 cents for half days. He said he would be there that afternoon. Oddly, the brief exchange left her feeling better. She meandered into the store, thinking she might look once more at their scant supply of dresses. She needed something to cheer her up. Once inside, however, she saw only Helga. Is Helmer here? No, he's out in the ice house. Helga didn't seem like an unpleasant woman, though Doreen knew the shop mistress was immune to her charms. Tell him I said hello. Can I help you with anything? Doreen, realizing she should probably try to cultivate a relationship with Helga, glanced around. I just came into town to speak with Manuel. He's helping with a few things at my new place. Yes, Helmer mentioned it. I'll I'll take a nickel's worth of those lemon drops. Helga nodded and placed a generous amount of the hard candies into a paper bag. Manuel is a good man, she said. Doreen left the Mercantile feeling disoriented, as if the world had been turned upon its head. For a moment she felt she might cry, but then she recalled her promise to herself. She thought about stopping in at the bank to say hello to Clement Endicott, the banker who had sold her the foreclosed house on the outskirts of town, but decided against it. Instead, she wandered aimlessly, hardly bothering to investigate the other shops. She didn't feel like herself, but couldn't decide if that was a bad thing. She recalled something else her father had said. Being in charge usually means everyone else gets their way. She couldn't recall what had prompted him to make the statement. Perhaps he had given in to one of her whims. Doreen recalled that her father hadn't seemed sad or angry when he made the statement. Indeed, he had seemed pleased with himself. She had already decided she needed at least one more woman for the house, and two would be even better. Unfortunately, Fort Worth, still a woolly frontier town, wasn't teeming with unmarried women available for the type of work she had in mind. She'd given the problem some thought. The largest saloon in Fort Worth sat adjacent to a two-story hotel, a half block from the bustling stockyards. The hotel served meals during the summer on a second-floor veranda. As the hour was still early, the hotel clerk, a burly man with an eye patch and enormous beard, pointed to the stairway. "We don't normally seat unaccompanied ladies, but ain't much business till lunch. The kitchen gal will be up in a few minutes with coffee and such." On the veranda, Doreen found that, other than a pair of elderly gentlemen with their wives, she had the place to herself. She sat at one end near the railing with a clear view of the saloon across the street. Dressed in a new gingham skirt and white blouse with a matching bonnet, she hoped she would not be taken for a prostitute, despite her unaccompanied status. A minute later, a waitress arrived. "Do you have any pastry? Perhaps a biscuit or sweet roll?" Doreen asked. "My mother makes conchas and empanadas with apples." "I will try one of those," Doreen said. "Which one?" The, the one with apples, please." The woman left and returned a few minutes later with coffee and a small fruit pie. Doreen noticed that, despite her shy demeanor, the young woman was quite pretty. "I'm new in town," Doreen said. "My sister works across the street, and my family sent me here to check on her." "Your sister is working across the street?" The waitress raised an eyebrow. "Yes, do you know any of the girls working there?" "I know all the girls working there." The waitress paused, then said, "Your sister is not in such a nice place." "It's just as I feared. I'm afraid my dear sister has fallen into sinful ways." The girl looked at Doreen with a degree of uncertainty. "What does your sister look like?" Doreen considered her answer. "She looks a little like me, except older. Maybe I know the one." Doreen remained at her table for nearly an hour, watching the comings and goings from the saloon. During that time, two different women left, both plain-looking. Since respectable women didn't frequent such places, Doreen knew both must be bar girls running errands. When the waitress returned, Doreen decided to drop the innocent sister charade. "How much do they pay you here?" she asked. The waitress smiled and looked critically at Doreen. "Your sister works across the street, yes?" "Well, no, not actually. I'm new in town, but do they pay you well here?" The girl paused. The elderly couple had gone, so they were alone. "They pay me $1.50 each day, and the owner expects me to do other things." The girl looked forlornly across the street. "I was working there, but there are so many cowboys coming, and the owner thinks because I'm Mexican he can pay me nothing." "You're prettier than the girls working there." "Of course, but I have a son at home. The restaurant owner takes my tips. Fort Worth is no an easy place." "Don't you have a husband?" The waitress nodded. "No, my man he left for Mexico. I think so, anyway." "How would you like to earn $2 a day, and any tips you receive would be yours?" Doreen placed a quarter secretively into the young woman's hand. Don't tell your owner about that. He doesn't know how to treat his employees. I I would like that. My mama is not always feeling well, and we're poor. $2 each day is, well, we could buy the things we need with that. Well, what is the work, though? She looked suspiciously at Doreen, already guessing the answer. The same work you were doing at the saloon, Doreen said, except with limited clientele. Do you understand clientele? Yes, it's the same word in Spanish. Then it's a deal. The woman looked at Doreen, took a deep breath, and nodded. I will try it, she said. Do you know Manuel from Schmidt's Mercantile? Yes, of course. He can show you where I'm at. I would like you to start in 1 week's time. Doreen left the hotel glad to have one problem partially solved. There was one more thing she needed. Men visiting a brothel expect two things: women and booze. The pretty waitress would be a partial solution to the first need, but thus far, Doreen had no idea where she might secure a steady and reasonably priced source of liquor. Back at the mercantile, she was relieved to find that Helmer had returned. She mentally calculated the money left in her account, just over $100. Her father had taught her many things about business, one of which was that you should always plan for higher costs than expected. Ah, Doreen! Helmer smiled broadly. So nice to see you again. We are becoming friends, you and I, yeah? She had to admit, despite his girth, Helmer had his charms. Though Doreen didn't recognize it in herself, there had been a subtle change in her way of seeing the people around her. Was it possible Helmer might become her friend? Good to see you too, Helmer. Might I speak with you privately for a moment? She nodded in the direction of Helmer, Jr., who was stocking items onto one of the shelves. Hermie, go milk both cows. We need to make more butter this evening. Helmer, Jr. looked crossly at his father, but didn't have the courage to argue. He stomped a bit as he left, which drew a smile from Helmer. The boy is like his mother, he said. I will get right to the point. I need a source for beer and whiskey. Would you know where I can purchase those items? Helmer chuckled. You had me send little Helmer out for that. We make beer right here. Once we know 3 or 4 men locally with Schnapsbrauerei. Oh, that is the word. Still, a still for making the moonshine. Is the right word, yeah? We also get some whiskey from Galveston and Houston and tequila from Mexico. When the train is coming through from the north, which is soon, oh my God, I reckon we will have wine from France, beer from St. Louis and Milwaukee, and even the single malt whiskies from Scotland. Mm. Helmer smacked his lips in anticipation. Can you explain how much this will all cost me? Doreen did her best to sound helpless, another ploy her father had taught her about dealing with merchants. Well, we have the small casks of beer for $6 each. The bigger cask, which are twice the volume, are 10. Little Helmer can show you how to tap them and even how to keep the beer cold. Since Manuel is working with you, he can perhaps build you a warehouse for your bar. He is a very good builder, Manuel. You will not be sorry with him. Oh my, That sounds like an awful lot. How much for the whiskey and some of the moonshine, or what was the other thing? Tequila. Very strong flavor. Popular with the cowboys. Elmer paused, looking at Doreen for a long moment. Perhaps it is good that little Helmer went out. Here is my deal for you. Maybe we can arrange for a special price in exchange for special favors, yeah? At your new business? Helmer winked at Doreen lasciviously. Yeah? Doreen grinned and gave the rotund shopkeeper a wink. Helmer, our friendship is important to me. Of course, you would have special consideration at my place. Can you give me an idea on the prices? Very good. Sehr gut. Beer will be your biggest seller. The large cask is better quality. The brew is more stable in the larger size, and for you, only $7. A case of our best whiskey is $12 for you, and the tequila is only $6 for 12 bottles. We will do a good deal of business, yeah? I hope so. I know so, Elmer said. I think many men in town are already knowing of you. You'll see. Feeling better, Doreen left Schmidt's store and mounted Cotton Socks. But instead of leaving town, she decided to explore. Riding along a street adjacent to the main thoroughfare, she discovered a dress shop run by an elderly woman who seemed pleased to see Doreen. Hello, dear. The woman sat behind a modern-looking sewing machine with a reciprocating needle. Doreen had heard of such machines, but had never seen one. The woman had only 3 dresses on display, but all of them were well-made and fashionable. Doreen was especially taken with an embroidered gingham blouse with an attached woolen skirt. The woman said she would make one to order and have it ready in a week. The cost would be $3. Her father's advice about spending echoed in her mind. She could not yet know how much revenue to expect from her new business. Nevertheless, she couldn't resist the dress and agreed to the price. I know it's a lot, the woman said, but you won't be disappointed. After the seamstress finished her measurements, Doreen left and spent another half hour looking around at the hub of businesses on the street adjacent Main. She found a pair of small eateries, a butcher shop, and a boot and saddle maker that had several pairs of pointed toe boots made in the style popular with vaqueros. There wasn't much else to see, even less than Abilene. So she made her way out of town in the direction of home. As she rode along, she spotted a weeping willow alongside the road. She wasn't quite ready to face Henry again, so she dismounted. She left Cotton Socks untethered to graze on the tall grass and settled beneath a tree. Feeling nostalgic, she pulled her book of Shakespeare's sonnets from her pocket. If I see the rudest or gentlest sight, the most sweet favor or deformedest creature, the mountain or the sea, the day or night, the crow or dove, it shapes them to your feature, incapable of more, replete with you, my most true mind thus makes mine untrue. The verse, one of endearment so complete that every living thing reminds the speaker of his love, put her in a reflective mood. The present of the word deformed brought Henry to mind. She'd never been one to feel regretful about her actions, so the memory of her earlier behavior confused her. For a moment, she felt her anger return, but realized with some consternation she had no one to be angry with other than herself. With a sigh, she placed the book on the grass and closed her eyes for a nap. She awoke later, sweating in the late afternoon heat. Cotton Socks had dozed as well and leaned against the willow by her side. The Henny had become more like a pet than a working animal. She gave Cotton Socks a long scratch behind each ear, just as she had seen Cynthia do weeks earlier. Cotton Socks nuzzled her gently, appreciative of the attention. Examining the sky, she reckoned it must be near 6 p.m. When she arrived home, the overcast skies had taken on hues of purple and rose-tinted blue. Outside the barn, Manuel stacked a bit of lumber, straightening things for the day. A moment later, Cactus Branch emerged, carrying a box of tools. He looked in her direction, but, as always, quickly diverted his gaze. "Did you make any progress?" Doreen asked. Henry nodded and gestured for her to follow. In a single day, the two men had framed in a partial wall near the entry and had constructed other framework for additional flooring and plastering along one entire wall. "Henry, this is remarkable," she said. "Thank you, ma'am." "And Henry, I'm so sorry about what I said earlier. That was terrible of me." "Yes, ma'am." For the rest of the week, she spent her days helping with the painting or in town gathering supplies. She also used the excursions to advertise her upcoming opening. She managed to hire two other bar girls, one a 40-ish Mexican woman with long dark hair and bewitching eyes, and the other a rather plain widow with a kind smile and two teenage children. Jenny, the widow, practically cried when Doreen told her that once they opened, she would earn $2 a day. As she went about the process of finding employees, Doreen recalled another bit of her father's wisdom. "If you're going to spend a little extra, spend it on people. Nothing pays more dividends than good health." 8 days later, the barn had been transformed. The exterior remained unchanged, save for a fresh coat of paint, but inside, where there had once been animal stalls and unfinished pine floors, there now stood a bar with a lacquered oak top, a brass rail, shelves for liquor, a large mirror, and a secure drawer for cash. The walls, now textured plaster, were iron gray with terracotta accents that gave the place a distinctive Southwest flavor. The original pine flooring had been thoroughly cleaned and stained a dark cherry color. Henry and Manuel had constructed tables and chairs to populate the room. In one corner, they situated the sofa from upstairs with a couple of other chairs and a coffee table to create a more intimate area. In another corner, they built a small stage with a studio piano purchased from the widow for $10 alongside. Behind the scenes, Henry had constructed a door with access to the water pump. Inside, across from the doorway from the water source, Manny constructed an insulated room with a galvanized tub for the beer keg. Even on the hottest summer days, Doreen's customers could enjoy a cool brew. Adjacent to the well closet, also near the pump, rested the brass bathtub and a stationary galvanized tub with a washboard for laundry. Manuel had created a neatly lined sign that said, "Baths, $2." Finally, Doreen's crew of two had converted the former grain storage area into a trio of small rooms for private entertainment. For each of those, Manuel and Henry built small but sturdy beds, night tables, and washstands. The day they were set to open, Doreen spent $20 on mattresses, linens for the beds, and additional lamps. After the purchase of a few other decor items, she had only $23 left in her account. If things didn't work out, she had no idea how she would make payroll for the week. She spent the day walking about town, reminding everyone of her opening, and stood ready at the doorway with her heart pounding at 7 p.m. that evening. With the widow playing the piano, Manuel strumming along on the guitar, and a dozen lamps lighting the room, the place came to life. Doreen had made it clear to everyone that clients must dress properly and would pay $4 at the door. This included the companionship of any of the ladies except herself, and 2 free drinks. By charging more compared to the saloons downtown, Doreen hoped to weed out the hordes of reeking cowhands passing through. Of course, those men would be welcome too, but only if they came properly dressed and with cash in hand. The first night, only 6 men arrived, but when they left, they all agreed that they had enjoyed themselves greatly and that Doreen's place gave Fort Worth a bit of class. By the 5th night, word had circulated that Doreen's place was worth the price, and she had to limit entry to 20 guests. By the following weekend, with a little shuffling and rearranging, they raised their capacity to 30 guests, and even then, she sometimes had men waiting outside. Soon, some of the wealthier clients began offering more to avoid the line, and exception, Doreen was happy to oblige. 3 weeks in, Doreen decided they had to have more space, so Henry began construction of a portico and elevated patio with an outdoor kitchen along the front of the barn. They began serving lunch, and at night, the patio provided a spot for the unwashed trail hands Doreen had originally thought they didn't want. The fact that one still had to pay $4 and be properly dressed to go inside only enhanced the exclusivity of the place. She hired 2 more girls for evenings, stealing them from the saloon downtown. She added a cook and a pair of lunchtime waitresses. At the end of June, after expanding her payroll again with a 3rd waitress, an additional cook, and 2 more barkeep security men, her average daily deposits at Ennicott's Bank, after payroll and expenses, had grown to over $100 a day and twice that on the weekends. By the end of July, Doreen Tarwater, at the tender age of 22, had done what many men twice her age had never managed. She had built a thriving business.